My son tried to cut me out of my own home, so I launched a brutal counterattack that left him shocked, arriving with a lawyer and a cop. The garage door groaned open like it was protesting against what I was about to do. But after what my son had pulled, protesting was a luxury he'd lost the right to. I walked past his prized possession, that gleaming black Mustang he'd been babying for 3 years, and grabbed the spare key from my workbench. The metal felt cold in my palm, but not as cold as the betrayal still burning in my chest. You see, 3 days ago I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my own son. Something so calculated, so heartless, that it made me question whether I'd raised a stranger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because this story, this nuclear explosion that tore through what was left of our family, it didn't happen overnight. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Robert Chen, and for the past 15 years, I've been living in the same 2-bedroom ranch house in Millfield, Ohio. Nothing fancy, mind you, just a modest place with vinyl siding and a small front yard that I kept meticulously trimmed. The kind of house where working-class families build their dreams one paycheck at a time. After my wife Linda passed away from cancer 4 years ago, that house became more than just 4 walls and a roof. It became my sanctuary, my connection to her memory, and honestly, my entire world. Every corner held pieces of our life together. The kitchen where she'd hum while making her famous apple pie. The living room where we'd watch old movies on Sunday afternoons. The bedroom where I still kept her jewelry box on the dresser, exactly where she'd left it. But houses require maintenance, and at 67, some repairs were getting beyond my capabilities. That's when my son Marcus stepped in with what seemed like the perfect solution. Marcus had always been good with numbers, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, and he'd been watching me struggle with the mounting costs of home ownership on a fixed income. "Dad," he'd said one evening over dinner, "why don't you let me handle the house stuff for a while? You know, take care of the bills, coordinate with contractors, maybe even refinance to get you a better rate." His voice carried that familiar tone of concerned authority that adult children use when they think their parents are losing their edge. At first, I resisted. Independence had always been important to me, but Marcus was persistent, and frankly, the stress of managing everything was wearing me down. The furnace had needed replacing the previous winter, the roof was showing its age, the property taxes kept climbing while my Social Security check stayed the same. So I made what seemed like a reasonable decision at the time. I added Marcus to the deed as a joint owner. Not to give him the house, mind you, but to make it easier for him to handle repairs and deal with contractors when I wasn't feeling up to it. It was supposed to be a practical arrangement, not a transfer of ownership. "This just makes everything smoother, Dad," Marcus had assured me as we sat in the lawyer's office. "I can take care of the headaches, and you can just enjoy your retirement." For 2 years, the arrangement worked perfectly. Marcus handled the paperwork, scheduled the repairs, even got us that better mortgage rate he'd promised. I felt like I'd raised a son who genuinely cared about my well-being. Every month, he'd stop by with a folder full of documents, explaining what needed to be done and how much everything cost. Looking back now, I realized those monthly visits were reconnaissance missions. Marcus wasn't just managing my affairs, he was studying them, learning every detail about my finances, my routines, my vulnerabilities. But at the time, I saw a dutiful son helping his aging father navigate the complexities of modern home ownership. The first red flag should have been his sudden interest in my long-term care plans. About 6 months ago, Marcus started bringing up assisted living facilities during our regular dinners together. "Dad, I've been thinking," he'd say, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "What happens if you fall and can't get up? What if you have a medical emergency and no one's around to help?" These conversations always made me uncomfortable, but I chalked it up to normal adult-child anxiety. After all, I was getting older, and Marcus had watched his mother's health decline rapidly. It made sense that he'd worry about me ending up in the same situation. But then he started getting specific about facilities. He'd bring brochures for places like Sunset Manor and Golden Years Community, glossy pamphlets featuring smiling elderly people playing cards and tending garden plots. The monthly costs listed on those brochures made my eyes water, but Marcus always had an answer ready. Don't worry about the money, Dad. We'll figure that out when the time comes. We'll figure that out. Not I'll help you figure that out, or we can look into financial aid. We'll figure that out. Like he was already planning something I wasn't part of. The second red flag was his increasing irritation with my independence. Simple things started bothering him. When I'd mentioned fixing something myself or making my own decisions about household purchases, I'd catch him rolling his eyes or letting out these little sighs of frustration. Dad, why didn't you just call me before hiring that plumber? He'd ask, reviewing my monthly expenses. I could have found someone cheaper. Or, you really don't need to be climbing ladders to clean the gutters anymore. That's what professionals are for. Every suggestion felt reasonable on its surface, but underneath, I started sensing something else. A growing impatience with my autonomy, like he was waiting for me to just hand over control entirely and stop pretending I could manage my own life. The third red flag was the most subtle, but probably the most telling. Marcus started talking about the house differently. Instead of referring to it as my house or your place, he'd slip into phrases like our property or the family home. At first, I thought it was just a linguistic quirk, but the frequency increased over time. The family home really needs new windows, he'd say during one of his monthly visits. Our property taxes are going up again next year. Our property taxes. Like he was already thinking of himself as the primary owner and me as some kind of temporary occupant. But despite these warning signs, I trusted my son. I trusted him because he was my son, because I'd raised him to be honest and caring, and because the alternative, the possibility that he might be planning something terrible, was too painful to seriously consider. That trust lasted right up until last Tuesday morning, when everything changed forever. I was sitting at my kitchen table, working through a crossword puzzle and enjoying my second cup of coffee, when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see a young woman in a business suit holding a clipboard and what looked like legal documents. Mr. Chen, she said when I opened the door. I'm Sarah Williams from Hartley Real Estate. I'm here about the final walkthrough for tomorrow's closing. Final walkthrough, closing. The words hit me like physical blows, but I managed to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. I'm not selling my house. Sarah's expression shifted from professional confidence to obvious confusion. She consulted her clipboard, flipping through several pages before looking back at me. Sir, according to our records, you and Marcus Chen are listed as co-owners of this property, and the sale was initiated by Marcus Chen as the primary contact. The closing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. My legs suddenly felt unsteady. I gripped the doorframe to keep myself upright as the full magnitude of what was happening began to sink in. How long has this house been on the market? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. About 6 weeks, sir. The buyer made an offer 3 weeks ago, and we've been working through the paperwork since then. I have to say, your son has been very responsive throughout the process. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, Marcus had been selling my house behind my back while continuing to have dinner with me every Sunday, listening to me talk about my plans for the spring garden and my ideas for repainting the spare bedroom. I need to see those documents, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, clearly sensing something was very wrong, but eventually handed over the paperwork. There it was, in black and white. A purchase agreement for my house, signed by Marcus Chen on behalf of both owners. The sale price made my stomach turn. It was well below market value, suggesting Marcus had been more interested in speed than money. At the bottom of the contract, I found the detail that made everything crystal clear. The proceeds from the sale were to be deposited into an account controlled solely by Marcus, not a joint account, not an account with my name on it. His account. I handed the documents back to Sarah with hands that shook despite my efforts to control them. There's been a serious misunderstanding, I told her. I never agreed to sell this house, and I'm not going to tomorrow's closing. Sarah's professional composure finally cracked completely. Sir, if you don't show up tomorrow, there could be serious legal consequences. The buyers have already secured financing and made arrangements to move in next week. Legal consequences for refusing to participate in the sale of my own home. After Sarah left, I sat in my living room for over an hour, staring at the walls that might not be mine much longer. Everything started making sense in the most horrible way possible. the assisted living brochures, Marcus's growing impatience with my independence, his casual references to our property. He hadn't been helping me manage my house. He'd been positioning himself to steal it. The phone calls I made that afternoon confirmed my worst fears. According to the lawyer who'd handled the deed change, Marcus legally could sell the house without my explicit consent because we were joint owners. The accountant who'd helped with the refinancing had assumed I was aware of the sale because Marcus had presented himself as handling all my financial affairs. Everyone had assumed I knew what was happening, because why would a son betray his father so completely? By evening, I'd made my decision about how to respond. If Marcus wanted to play games with family property, I could play games too, and I knew exactly where to start. That gleaming black Mustang in my garage wasn't just Marcus's pride and joy. It was his statement piece, his way of showing the world he'd made something of himself. He'd spent 3 years restoring it, hunting down original parts, perfecting every detail. He talked about that car the way other people talked about their children. But here's what Marcus had forgotten in his rush to steal my house. That car was parked in my garage because his apartment complex didn't allow overnight street parking. And since he'd added himself to my homeowner's insurance policy to get a better rate on the car, I was technically listed as a co-owner on the registration. The same legal loophole he'd used to sell my house worked in reverse. As I stood there in the garage, holding those keys and looking at his precious Mustang, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Linda's death. Purpose. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Marcus had taught me an important lesson about family loyalty and legal technicalities. Now it was time to return the favor. I walked back into the house and made a phone call that would change everything. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Pete's Auto Sales? We buy any car, any condition?" "Pete, this is Robert Chen. I need to sell a car today and I need it gone before 5 o'clock. There was a pause on the other end. Pete Romano had been running his used car lot for 25 years, and he'd heard every sob story and desperate situation imaginable. But something in my voice must have convinced him this wasn't a typical transaction. "What kind of car are we talking about, Robert?" "A 1969 Ford Mustang, fully restored, black exterior, red leather interior. Every bolt and screw has been replaced with original parts." The silence stretched longer this time. Pete knew cars, and he knew what a pristine '69 Mustang was worth in today's market. "Robert, that's not the kind of car people sell in a hurry unless something's seriously wrong. You in some kind of trouble?" I looked through my kitchen window at the garage where Marcus's dream car sat waiting. Let's just say I'm settling a family debt. Within 2 hours, Pete arrived with a flatbed truck and a briefcase full of cash. He spent 30 minutes inspecting every inch of the Mustang, running his hands along the paint job, checking under the hood, examining the interior with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. "This is museum-quality work," he said finally. "Whoever restored this knew what they were doing." "My son spent 3 years on it," I replied, watching Pete make notes on his inspection sheet. "Your son's got good taste and better skills. I can give you $18,000 cash right now." $18,000, more money than I'd seen in one place since Linda's life insurance payout. But more importantly, it was $18,000 that Marcus would never see, never spend, never use to fund whatever lifestyle he was planning with the proceeds from stealing my house. "Nay, deal," I said, and we shook hands. As Pete's crew loaded the Mustang onto the flatbed, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness that surprised me. Satisfaction, because justice was finally being served. Sadness, because this beautiful machine represented countless hours of father-son bonding that had apparently meant nothing to Marcus. I remembered the weekends he'd spent in that garage, carefully sanding rust spots and hunting through salvage yards for the perfect carburetor. He'd been so proud of that car, so eager to show me each improvement, each step closer to his vision of automotive perfection. "Dad, look at this," he'd say, holding up some obscure engine component like it was a precious artifact. "This is the original air filter housing from a '69 Boss 302. Do you know how rare this is?" I didn't know then, and I didn't particularly care about automotive history. But I cared about my son's enthusiasm, his dedication to craftsmanship, his excitement about creating something beautiful from something broken. Now, watching that same car disappear down my street on the back of a tow truck, I wondered when exactly Marcus had stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an obstacle to overcome. The answer to that question came sooner than I expected. At exactly 4:30, Marcus's Honda Civic pulled into my driveway with the punctuality of a Swiss watch. He always visited on Wednesdays after work, usually staying for dinner and whatever baseball game happened to be on television. Today would be different. I watched from my living room window as he walked toward the garage, probably planning to check on his precious Mustang before coming inside. The garage door was closed, which wasn't unusual, but I saw him pause at the side window, cupping his hands around his face to peer inside. The pause stretched into a long moment, then another. Then he was running toward my front door with the kind of panic I'd only seen once before, when Linda had collapsed in the kitchen during her final weeks. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He burst through my front door like the house was on fire. "Dad, where's my car?" I was sitting in my recliner, the same chair where I'd spent countless evenings reading to Marcus when he was young. The evening news was playing on the television, something about rising interest rates and their impact on the housing market. How fitting. "Hello, Marcus, how was work today?" "Don't play games with me, Dad. Where is my Mustang?" His face was flushed, his normally perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. The composed accountant who'd been methodically stealing my house had been replaced by a panicked child who'd lost his favorite toy. "I sold it," I said simply, not taking my eyes off the television screen. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Marcus stood frozen in my doorway, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to process words that didn't make sense. "You sold my car." "I sold a car that was parked in my garage, registered under my insurance policy, and legally classified as jointly owned property." I finally looked at him directly. "Sound familiar?" Understanding dawned in his eyes like sunrise breaking over a wasteland. He knew exactly why this was happening, and more importantly, he knew he'd been caught. "Dad, that's completely different. The house situation is complicated. There are financial considerations you don't understand." "Enlighten me," I said, muting the television with the remote. "Explain to me why selling my home without my knowledge or consent is complicated, but selling your car under the exact same legal circumstances is theft." Marcus began pacing around my living room, his hands gesturing wildly as he searched for words that might justify the unjustifiable. "The house is different because you can't maintain it properly anymore. You're 77 years old, Dad. What happens when you fall down the stairs? What happens when you can't remember to turn off the stove?" "I'm 67, Marcus, not 77, and my memory works just fine, which is why I remember you telling me that deed change was just to help with repairs." He stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been genuine confusion. "You're not thinking clearly about this, Dad. The buyers are expecting to close tomorrow. The contracts are signed. There are legal obligations." Legal obligations. The same phrase Sarah Williams had used when she'd tried to explain why I had to participate in the theft of my own home. "Marcus, sit down." Something in my tone must have convinced him to comply. He perched on the edge of Linda's old reading chair, the one I'd kept exactly as she'd left it, with her bookmark still marking page 237 of the mystery novel she'd never finish. "I want you to explain something to me," I continued. "When exactly did you decide I was incompetent to manage my own affairs?" "Dad, it's not about incompetence, it's about being practical." "When did you decide my house was really your inheritance to claim whenever convenient?" "That's not what happened." "When did you decide lying to your father was an acceptable way to solve your financial problems?" Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. His carefully maintained facade of concerned son crumbled, revealing something ugly underneath. "You want to know the truth, Dad? Fine. Here's the truth. You're living in a house you can't afford, in a neighborhood that's declining, while sitting on $200,000 of equity that could secure both our futures. Both our futures." There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair again, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. "The assisted living facility I showed you, Sunset Manor? I put down a deposit 6 weeks ago. It's a nice place, Dad. Really nice. You'd have your own apartment, activities, medical care on site, and the equity from the house sale would cover the costs for years." "You put down a deposit before asking if I wanted to live there." I knew you'd resist change. You always do. But sometimes people need to make difficult decisions for the ones they love. The ones they love? I stared at my son, this stranger wearing Marcus's face, and tried to find some trace of the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to crawl into bed with Linda and me during thunderstorms. The boy who'd cried when his goldfish died and insisted we hold a proper funeral in the backyard. Marcus, do you remember what you said at your mother's funeral? The question seemed to catch him off guard. His angry expression softened slightly. I said a lot of things that day, Dad. You said that family was the only thing that really mattered, that everything else was just stuff that could be replaced, but family was forever. Marcus looked down at his hands, and for a moment I thought I might have reached something real inside him. You also promised your mother you'd take care of me. Do you remember that promise? When he looked up again, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was set with stubborn determination. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, Dad. Take care of you. By stealing my house and forcing me into a nursing home, by making sure you're safe and secure for the rest of your life. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of our mutual betrayal settling between us like toxic fog. Outside, I could hear children playing in the street, their laughter carrying through the evening air like echoes from a different world where families protected each other instead of preying on each other. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice quieter now but no less determined. Dad, we can work this out. The car thing, I'm upset about it, but I understand why you did it. You're angry and you wanted to make a point. Fine. Point made. But we still need to deal with the house situation. There is no house situation, Marcus. I'm not selling my house and I'm not moving into Sunset Manor. The contracts are already signed. The buyers have financing in place. If we don't close tomorrow, there could be serious legal consequences. Those words again. Legal consequences. The threat that was supposed to scare me into compliance. Marcus, let me ask you something. When you were 8 years old and you broke Mrs. Patterson's window with your baseball, what did I teach you to do? He looked confused by the change of subject. I had to go apologize and pay for the repair with my allowance money. That's right. I taught you that when you make a mistake, you take responsibility and fix it, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. Dad, this isn't the same thing. You made a mistake, Marcus, a big one. You tried to steal your father's house and now you're facing the consequences. The question is, are you going to take responsibility like the man I raised you to be? Or are you going to keep lying and making threats? Marcus stood up abruptly, his brief moment of vulnerability replaced by cold anger. You have no idea what you're doing, Dad. No idea what kind of mess you're creating. But fine. If this is how you want to handle things, then that's your choice. He walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. Just remember, when you're struggling to pay your bills next month, when something breaks down and you can't afford to fix it, when you're sitting alone in this house wondering why your son doesn't visit anymore, remember that you chose this. The front door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. I sat in my recliner as darkness fell outside, thinking about the boy who used to help me rake leaves every October, who'd insisted on learning to change his own oil because he wanted to be self-sufficient like his old man. That boy was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and wasn't sure I could forgive. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, and I needed to be ready for whatever Marcus had planned next. Because this war between father and son was far from over. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray October sky that seemed to match my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night replaying Marcus's parting words and wondering if I'd pushed too far too fast. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Sarah Williams standing on my doorstep with those closing documents, and my resolve hardened like concrete in winter. At 7:30, my phone started ringing. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By 8 o'clock, he'd called 6 times without leaving a single message. The silence spoke louder than any words could have. I was nursing my second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Marcus standing on my front porch, but he wasn't alone. A woman in an expensive-looking pantsuit stood beside him, clutching a leather briefcase like it contained the secrets of the universe. Behind them, a police cruiser sat in my driveway. This was escalation. This was Marcus playing hardball. I opened the door and immediately recognized the tactical formation they'd arranged. Marcus slightly behind the woman, letting her take point. The police officer positioned where I could see him, but not close enough to seem immediately threatening. Classic intimidation strategy. "Mr. Chen, I'm attorney Rebecca Morrison from Morrison & Associates." The woman's voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of winning arguments in courtrooms. "I represent your son Marcus in this matter regarding the pending real estate transaction." "Good morning, Rebecca. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. There is no pending real estate transaction." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Chen, I have documentation showing that you are indeed a party to a legally binding contract for the sale of this property. Failure to appear at today's closing could result in significant financial penalties." The police officer stepped forward slightly. He was young, probably early 30s, with the earnest expression of someone who genuinely wanted to help but didn't understand the situation he'd walked into. "Sir, I'm Officer Martinez. We received a call about a possible elder abuse situation. Are you being prevented from accessing your own property or financial accounts?" Elder abuse. Marcus had called the police and reported me for elder abuse. The audacity was breathtaking. "Officer Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not being abused by anyone. In fact, quite the opposite is true." Marcus finally spoke up, his voice carrying a tremor that could have been genuine emotion or carefully practiced manipulation. "Ted, please. We're just trying to help you understand the legal situation. You can't just decide not to honor a contract because you're upset about something else." Something else. He was reducing the theft of my house to something else, like we'd had a disagreement about dinner plans. "Marcus, would you mind explaining to Officer Martinez exactly how this contract came to exist?" Rebecca Morrison stepped in before Marcus could answer. "Mr. Chen, the specifics of how the contract was negotiated aren't relevant to the current legal obligations. What matters is that valid signatures appear on binding documents." "Valid signatures," I repeated slowly. "Officer Martinez, would you consider a signature valid if the person signing had no knowledge of what they were agreeing to?" The officer's expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing his earlier certainty. "Sir, are you saying you didn't know you were signing a real estate contract?" "I'm saying I never signed anything. I never agreed to sell my house. I never even knew it was for sale until yesterday afternoon." Rebecca Morrison's confident smile faltered for just a moment. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Mr. Chen, your son is listed as joint owner of this property with full authority to act on behalf of both parties. The sale was initiated legally and properly." "Full authority granted for the purpose of handling repairs and maintenance," I corrected, "not for selling the house without my knowledge or consent." Officer Martinez was looking increasingly uncomfortable with his role in this family drama. "Folks, this sounds like a civil matter that should be resolved between your attorneys. I'm not seeing any immediate safety concerns here." But Marcus wasn't ready to give up that easily. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what looked like a prepared list of talking points. "Officer, my father has been showing signs of confusion lately. Memory problems, difficulty managing finances, poor judgment about home maintenance. Yesterday he sold my car without permission, which demonstrates impaired decision-making abilities." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Marcus was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent in front of a police officer, using the very car sale I'd orchestrated as evidence of my diminished capacity. "Marcus, that car was parked in my garage, insured under my policy and legally classified as joint property. The exact same circumstances you used to justify selling my house." Rebecca Morrison sensed an opening and pressed forward. "Mr. Chen, regardless of your feelings about your son's decision-making process, you have legal obligations that must be fulfilled. The buyers have secured financing, arranged moving services, and made other commitments based on today's closing. Then perhaps Marcus should have consulted with me before creating those obligations." The standoff continued for another 20 minutes, with Rebecca Morrison citing various legal statutes and Marcus painting increasingly dramatic pictures of my supposed mental decline. Officer Martinez looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Finally, the officer's radio crackled with what sounded like an emergency call. He listened for a moment, then looked at our little group with obvious relief. "Folks, I need to respond to another call. Mr. Chen, you seem alert and oriented to me. If you feel you're being taken advantage of financially, I'd recommend contacting Adult Protective Services or consulting with your own attorney. After Officer Martinez left, Rebecca Morrison tried one more approach. Mr. Chen, I'm going to be very direct with you. If you don't appear at today's closing, my client will have grounds to sue you for breach of contract. The damages could easily exceed $50,000. $50,000. The number was designed to terrify me, to make compliance seem like the only reasonable option. Rebecca, I'm going to be equally direct with you. Your client committed fraud when he listed my house for sale without my knowledge. He committed theft when he arranged to deposit the proceeds into his personal account. If anyone should be worried about lawsuits, it's Marcus. For the first time since arriving, Rebecca Morrison looked genuinely uncertain. She glanced at Marcus with an expression that suggested she might be reevaluating her client's version of events. Marcus, meanwhile, had gone pale. The confident son who'd called the police on his father was being replaced by someone who was beginning to realize his plan had serious flaws. Dad, you don't understand how expensive legal battles can be. Even if you're right, which I'm not saying you are, but even if you are, the costs of fighting this could bankrupt you. Marcus, I sold your car for $18,000 yesterday. That's enough to hire a very good attorney for quite some time. The admission hit him like a physical blow. His precious Mustang, 3 years of painstaking restoration work, had been converted into my legal defense fund. Rebecca Morrison was already backing toward her car, clearly wanting to distance herself from what was becoming an obvious family disaster. Mr. Chen, I'll need to consult with my client about how to proceed. This situation is more complex than originally presented. After they left, I sat in my living room and tried to process what had just happened. Marcus had escalated our conflict to include lawyers and police officers. He'd accused me of elder abuse and mental incompetence. He'd threatened me with financial ruin if I didn't comply with his theft. The sweet boy who used to help me build birdhouses in the garage had become someone I didn't recognize. But if Marcus thought intimidation tactics would work on a man who'd survived 67 years of life's challenges, he was about to learn otherwise. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd written down the night before. Morrison and Associates, a receptionist answered. This is Robert Chen. I need to speak with someone about hiring legal representation for a real estate fraud case. One moment, please. I'll connect you with Mr. James Morrison. While I waited on hold, I looked around my living room at all the memories Marcus was trying to sell. Linda's reading chair, where she'd spent countless evenings lost in mystery novels. The bookshelf I'd built myself, filled with volumes we'd collected over 30 years of marriage. The family photos documenting Marcus's childhood, from gap-toothed school pictures to his college graduation. This wasn't just about a house. This was about everything I'd built, everything I'd preserved, everything that connected me to the life Linda and I had shared. Mr. Chen, this is James Morrison. I understand you need legal assistance with a real estate matter. Mr. Morrison, my son is trying to steal my house and he's hired your colleague Rebecca Morrison to help him do it. I need someone who can fight fire with fire. James Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Chen, did you say Rebecca Morrison is representing the other party? That's correct. Well, that's interesting. Rebecca is my daughter. And if she's involved in something fraudulent, I think we need to have a very serious conversation. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about justice. Sometimes the very weapons your enemies choose become the tools of their own destruction. I smiled for the first time in days. Mr. Morrison, I think we're going to get along just fine. The war was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a fighting chance. And Marcus was about to discover that his old man still had a few tricks left to learn. The meeting with James Morrison took place in a conference room that smelled of leather and old money. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Millfield's modest skyline, while oil paintings of stern-faced judges watched from mahogany-paneled walls. This was the kind of place where serious legal battles were planned and won. James Morrison was nothing like I'd expected. Where Rebecca had been all sharp angles and aggressive energy, her father possessed the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 40 years winning cases through preparation rather than intimidation. Silver-haired and soft-spoken, he reviewed my documents with the methodical precision of a surgeon examining X-rays. Mr. Chen, this is quite a mess your son has created. he said finally, setting down the last page of paperwork. "But it's not insurmountable. The good news is that Rebecca was right about one thing. The contracts are legally binding. The bad news for Marcus is that fraud vitiates everything." Meaning what exactly? Meaning that if we can prove Marcus misrepresented the circumstances of this sale, the entire transaction becomes void. The buyers would have grounds to sue Marcus personally for any damages they incur. James leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of him. "Tell me about the day Marcus convinced you to add him to the deed." I closed my eyes, remembering that afternoon 2 years ago. He said it was just paperwork to make repairs easier, that I'd still own the house, but he could deal with contractors and handle maintenance issues when I wasn't feeling up to it. Did he ever mention selling the property as a possibility? Never, not once. If he had, I would have said absolutely not. James made notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen scratching quietly in the silence. "What about the assisted living facility? When did those conversations begin?" "About 6 months ago. He kept bringing brochures, talking about what would happen if I had a medical emergency. But he presented it as planning for the future, not as something that was going to happen immediately." "And you never agreed to move to Sunset Manor?" "I never even visited the place. Marcus said he'd checked it out for me, that it was nice, but I never expressed any interest in actually living there." James set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Mr. Chen, I need you to understand something. What Marcus has done isn't just morally wrong, it's criminally fraudulent. He used his position as joint owner to deceive not just you, but the buyers, the real estate agent, and the mortgage company. Everyone involved in this transaction was operating under false pretenses. The weight of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. My son hadn't just betrayed our family trust. He'd committed actual crimes. What happens next? First, we file an emergency injunction to stop today's closing. Then, we notify all parties that the sale was conducted without proper authorization. The buyers will be upset, but they'll have legal's expression hardened slightly. Marcus will face the consequences of his choices. Recourse against Marcus for any losses they incur." "And Marcus?" "James Morrison. Depending on how aggressively we pursue this, he could be looking at charges for elder abuse, fraud, and theft by deception. The district attorney takes these cases very seriously. Criminal charges. The possibility that my son might end up in prison because of his greed and stupidity made my stomach turn. But then I remembered his words from the night before. When you're sitting alone in this house, wondering why your son doesn't visit anymore, remember that you chose this. Marcus had made his choice. Now he'd live with the consequences. Mr. Morrison, I want to pursue this as aggressively as possible. My son needs to learn that actions have consequences." Within 2 hours, James Morrison had filed emergency motions that brought Marcus's carefully planned theft to a screaming halt. The closing was canceled. The buyers were furious. The real estate agent was threatening her own lawsuit, and Marcus was about to discover that stealing from your father was significantly more complicated than he'd anticipated. My phone started ringing at 3:15. Marcus again, probably calling from the law office where he'd expected to be counting his ill-gotten gains. This time, I answered. "Dad, what the hell have you done?" His voice carried a panic I'd never heard before. Gone was the composed accountant who'd tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. This was someone whose world was collapsing in real time. "Hello, Marcus. I hired an attorney to protect my interests. Seemed like the reasonable thing to do." "You can't just cancel a real estate closing. There are contracts, obligations, legal commitments." "Marcus, I never signed any contracts. I never made any commitments. You did all of that without my knowledge or consent, which makes it fraud." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, you don't understand what you've done. The buyers put down earnest money. They sold their previous house. They hired movers. If this deal falls through, they're going to sue me for everything I have. Then you probably should have considered those possibilities before you decided to steal my house." "I wasn't stealing anything. I was trying to take care of you." By lying to me for months, by putting deposits on nursing homes without asking, by arranging to steal $200,000. Marcus's composure finally shattered completely. "Fine. You want to know the truth? Here's the truth. I owe money, Dad. A lot of money. Bad investments, credit card debt, some gambling losses I can't cover. The equity from the house was going to solve everything. There it was. The real reason behind months of manipulation and betrayal. Marcus wasn't trying to protect me from anything. He was trying to protect himself from the consequences of his own poor decisions. How much money, Marcus? $68,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but the house equity would have covered it completely, with plenty left over for your care at Sunset Manor. $68,000. My son had been willing to destroy our relationship, steal my home, and force me into a nursing home to cover gambling debts. Marcus, when your mother was dying, do you remember what she made you promise? Dad, please don't bring Mom into this. She made you promise to take care of me, to be the kind of man she'd raised you to be, to never let money come between family. The sound of Marcus crying carried through the phone line, raw and desperate. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I know I screwed up, Dad. I know this looks terrible, but we can still fix this. Call off your lawyer, let the closing happen, and I promise I'll make sure you're comfortable at Sunset Manor. They have activities, medical care, other people your age. Other people my age. Like I was some kind of expired product that needed to be warehoused with similar items. Marcus, the only thing that needs fixing is your relationship with honesty. And that's something you'll have to work on yourself. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, looking around at the home Marcus had tried to steal. The afternoon light streaming through Linda's favorite window cast familiar shadows across the table where we'd shared thousands of meals together. This house wasn't just my shelter. It was the repository of every important moment in my adult life. No amount of money was worth giving that up, especially not money that would only enable my son's continued bad decisions. At 5 o'clock, Rebecca Morrison called personally. Mr. Chen, I think we need to discuss a settlement that works for everyone involved. Her tone had changed completely since the morning. The aggressive attorney had been replaced by someone trying to minimize damage to her own reputation. Rebecca, the only settlement I'm interested in is getting my son out of my financial affairs permanently. Mr. Chen, I need you to understand that my client was operating under the belief that he had your best interests at heart. Perhaps there was some miscommunication about the extent of his authority. Miscommunication, the legal profession's favorite euphemism for lies. Rebecca, your client deposited earnest money into his personal account. He arranged for all sale proceeds to go directly to him. He put a deposit on a nursing home without my knowledge. That's not miscommunication. That's theft. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Rebecca trying various approaches to convince me to allow the sale to proceed. She offered to have Marcus sign over a portion of the proceeds to me. She suggested mediation. She even hinted that pursuing the matter further might damage my relationship with my son permanently. What she didn't seem to understand was that Marcus had already damaged our relationship beyond repair. I was just making sure there were consequences for his choices. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson from next door, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the concerned expression of someone who'd been watching drama unfold from her kitchen window. Robert, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I couldn't help but notice all the commotion today. Mrs. Patterson had been my neighbor for 15 years, ever since she and her husband Harold had moved in after retiring from the school district. She'd been one of the few people who'd consistently checked on me after Linda's death, bringing occasional meals and making sure I was managing okay on my own. Come in, Eleanor. I appreciate you stopping by. We sat in my living room, the casserole dish cooling between us while I explained the basics of what Marcus had attempted. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression growing more horrified with each detail. Robert, I can't believe Marcus would do such a thing. He always seemed like such a devoted son. So did I, Eleanor, so did I. What happens now? Are you going to press charges? The question I'd been avoiding all day. Was I really prepared to have my own son arrested for trying to steal from me? I don't know yet. Part of me wants him to face the full consequences of what he's done, but another part of me keeps remembering the little boy who used to help me rake leaves every fall. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Harold used to say that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices, even when it breaks your heart to watch. After she left, I sat alone with my thoughts and her casserole, trying to decide what justice looked like in a situation like this. Marcus had betrayed my trust, stolen my property, and tried to warehouse me in a nursing home to cover his gambling debts. Those actions deserved consequences, but he was still my son, the child Linda and I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for. The man who'd cried at his mother's funeral and promised to take care of me. The phone rang again at 9 o'clock. This time, it wasn't Marcus. "Mr. Chen, this is Detective Sarah Walsh with the Millfield Police Department. I understand you may want to file charges related to financial elder abuse." Word traveled fast in a small town. Someone, probably James Morrison, had contacted the police about Marcus's actions. "Detective Walsh, I'm not sure what I want to do yet." "Mr. Chen, I know this is difficult. Family cases always are. But I want you to know that what you've described constitutes serious criminal activity. Financial exploitation of elderly persons is a felony in Ohio." A felony. Marcus could go to prison for what he'd done. What would happen if I decided to press charges? We'd investigate the circumstances, interview all parties involved, and if we found evidence of criminal activity, we'd present the case to the prosecutor's office. Given the dollar amounts involved, your son could be looking at significant jail time. Significant jail time. I tried to picture Marcus in an orange jumpsuit, sitting in a prison cell, and found that I couldn't. "Detective Walsh, I need some time to think about this." Of course, Mr. Chen. Take all the time you need. But don't wait too long. Evidence gets stale and witnesses sometimes forget important details." After hanging up, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks like I had every night for 15 years. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I was acutely aware that this familiar routine might never have happened again if Marcus's plan had succeeded. I would have been sitting in some sterile apartment at Sunset Manor, wondering how my life had been reduced to scheduled activities and communal dining. Meanwhile, strangers would have been sleeping in the bedroom Linda and I had shared, cooking in the kitchen where she'd taught Marcus to make pancakes, living in the space where we'd built our family. The thought made me angrier than I'd been all day. Marcus had been willing to steal not just my house, but my entire connection to Linda's memory. Every corner that held pieces of our life together would have been erased, sold to fund his gambling debts. That wasn't the action of a concerned son trying to protect his aging father. That was the action of someone who viewed me as an obstacle to his own desires. I picked up the phone and dialed Detective Walsh's number. "Detective, this is Robert Chen. I'd like to press charges against my son for financial elder abuse." The decision felt both inevitable and heartbreaking. But sometimes love means holding people accountable for their choices, even when those people are your own children. Marcus had taught me that family loyalty was a two-way street. Now he was going to learn the same lesson. The next few days passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. I went through my normal routines: morning coffee, checking the mail, tending to the small garden Linda had planted behind the house. But everything felt different now. The house that had been my sanctuary for 15 years now felt like a fortress under siege. Detective Walsh called on Friday morning with an update that made my stomach clench. "Mr. Chen, we've completed our preliminary investigation. The evidence is pretty overwhelming. Bank records, forged authorizations, misrepresented contracts. The prosecutor's office wants to move forward with charges." I set down my coffee mug with hands that trembled slightly. "What kind of charges?" "Financial exploitation of an elderly person in the first degree, theft by deception, and fraud. Combined, we're looking at potential sentences of 8 to 15 years. 15 years. Marcus was 34 years old. He'd be nearly 50 by the time he got out of prison, assuming he served the maximum sentence. The boy who used to build model airplanes at my kitchen table could spend the rest of his 30s behind bars. Detective Walsh, is there any way to handle this that doesn't involve prison time?" "Mr. Chen, I understand this is your son, and these decisions are never easy. But the law is pretty clear about financial crimes against elderly victims. The penalties are severe because this kind of abuse is so devastating to families." After she hung up, I sat in Linda's reading chair and tried to imagine explaining to her why I'd had our son arrested. She'd always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found compromises that let everyone save face. But Linda had also been the one who insisted on consequences when Marcus misbehaved as a child. No matter how much his tears broke her heart, she never let him escape responsibility for his actions. Discipline is love, Robert, she used to say. If we don't teach him that choices have consequences, the world will teach him in much harsher ways. Marcus learned those consequences the hard way. 3 months later, he pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have destroyed what little remained of his reputation. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in prison, followed by 5 years of probation and full restitution of the $18,000 I'd received from selling his car. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the people who love us most, and sometimes protecting someone means letting them face the full weight of their choices, even when it breaks your heart to watch.